Okay, we're going to add a little bit of panache to our edit now by using something called a transition. And a transition is simply how to go from one shot to another other than a straight cut. So what we have right now is straight cuts, and you can tell there's these straight lines in between each one. They're just jumping right from one shot to the next. So if I play this in the timeline, bam, straight cut, and bam, straight cut to the next shot. Okay, so that works. That's a perfectly legitimate way to edit, and usually, more often than not, is the best way to do your editing. However, we're oftentimes going to need a smoother transition, something that indicates either a passage of time or a certain type of feeling. And the most times that you see this is at the beginning and end. We'll do a very simple fade in and fade out on this project. And how you add a transition is, remember again how your arrow changes depending on where you place it over a clip. So when you put it on the edge for doing trimming, like I can change the duration of this shot. If I simply click it instead of clicking and dragging, I'll get a highlighted area around the edge of the clip. Now this means that I can do a modification to just the edge or the transition area of the clip, instead of when I click the clip in the middle, it selects the whole thing. So we're going to select the edge, so we get that funky little edge selection icon. Then I'm going to go up to the effects menu, and fortunately Final Cut comes with a default of video transition called a cross dissolve. You can see all the video transitions that are selected and sorted by types, maps and page peels and all sorts of terrible things that you wouldn't ever want to use. But the dissolve is very classy, it's very simple, and they've made that the default. So instead of having to sort of dig around and find it inside of dissolves, cross dissolves, you can just use this default cross dissolve option. And when I click that, it's going to make an icon for a transition in the timeline. And if I back up and play that back, you'll see the spinning pinwheel of doom, of course. It probably doesn't like the resolution of my file. Okay, I've had words with the Final Cut program in private. We've worked out our differences. So now it will actually show you this transition. So I'm going to play this in the timeline and watch what happens up in the canvas. When it plays over that section, it does a cross dissolve. It fades to black. And it only fades to black because there's nothing underneath here. When there's nothing underneath a clip, it just assumes that it's going to be black. If there was a clip underneath it, it would fade it out and you would see what was underneath. So now we've got sort of a very classy ending to our video. We can do the same thing to the beginning. Notice if you click on the transition area between two clips, you'll always get this transition selector, and you also will get it at the very beginning, at the edge of the clip. And I'm going to do the same thing. I selected that edge, and I'm going to Effects, I'm going to use the default cross dissolve. And then I'm going to go to the beginning. I can either drag my timeline selector, my playback head, using the yellow arrow, drag it all the way to the beginning, or you can always use the home key on your keyboard. And then I'm going to play it back, and it fades in, plays that clip, and if I jump ahead to the end, it's going to fade out at the end. Now those are the default settings. You can actually change the duration of the transition if you want, and it works the same way as changing the duration of a clip itself. You simply select the edge, go to the edge of this icon that shows how long the fade is, and drag it out. So that'll make a very long dissolve. You can also shorten it, drag it to the edge, make it very short, and the pop-up tells you how long it's going to be. The new duration is 1 second at that point. Or I can make it super long. I can make it 5 seconds long, so it takes forever for it to fade in. Let's see what that looks like. I can go to Home and play back, and there it's a very slow fade. Now if I decide that I don't like these and I want to get rid of them, it's very simple. You click on the dissolve icon or the transition icon and hit the delete key on your keyboard. Or alternatively, you can right click on it and choose cut. You can also do these dissolves between images. So instead of going from black or from nothing to your shot, you can do them from one image to the next. So I've selected this transitional element between these two shots, and I'm going to choose Effects, Cross Dissolve. So when I play that back, watch what happens. It fades from one to the next. Very simple, but it can give the idea of sort of a time passage or something that's more dynamic than a straight cut, something that has some sort of an emotional weight to it. And you notice when I drag the edge here, when it's between two clips, it actually changes in both directions because this edit, this transition, is centered on that cut point, so half of the dissolve starts before the edit and the other half of the dissolve ends after the edit. So you notice when I drag the edges here, it's doing sort of a mirrored effect. So if I make this a lot longer, it's going to take some of that duration out of the first clip and some of that duration out of the second clip. If I play it back, this is a much smoother, slower dissolve. Now sometimes when you do these effects, you're going to have to render them. A cross dissolve can usually be done in real time, but it's nice to know how to tell Final Cut to play this back, not just using the real time, but to actually create a new video file of that effect and not try to do it in real time. So I'm going to select this cross dissolve and I'm going to go to Sequence and choose Render Selection, Preview. That selects what it will render when I tell it to do the render. By default, it only does things that absolutely have to be rendered, these red bars. And what those colors are reflecting is this bar at the top of your timeline. If there's something that it can't do in real time, it will put a red bar up here. Right now it can handle everything we're throwing at it, but we want to render it anyway so that we're seeing what's actually going to go into our final file. So I want it to render the green bars as well as the red bars. So now I'm going to choose Render Selection Both, which means video and audio, or since there's no audio, I can just use Render Selection Video. This will give us a crunching window here, and we'll get, instead of a green bar, we're going to get a dark blue bar, which means that this has been rendered to a temporary file, so it's showing us the fully calculated, full quality rendering of that transition. And when I play it back, I know that that's exactly how it's going to look. It's not trying to give me a compressed, sort of rough version for real time. And that's how you would render things if you have any red sections up here on the top of your timeline. That means you need to render them, and you do that by making a selection of the part that you want to render, Sequence, Render Selection, and if it's audio, if you have audio, you just choose both. If it's just video, you can choose video. And that's what you need to know about rendering and transitions.